Well, everyone. So it's Wednesday. Yeah, I kind of compressed all my misery into one day, and I have to put on a suit later today, so like double the misery as normal. So if I seem like I'm in a bad mood, it's because I'm in a bad mood. Um, but it's not all bad. We're moving to emerging technologies discussions. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Just as a reminder, we have this week, and then after that, we basically got 4 weeks left in the course. So 12, 13, 14, 15, yeah, do the math. Um, there is no scheduled final exam for the course. Technically speaking, the university policy is that we're supposed to hold class session during the finals week. I'm not going to hold you to that. My assumption is that I'm going to have a class session during a scheduled finals exam, and nobody's going to show up. Now, if you do plan on showing up for that final exam date, please let me know. I will hurry on down and make sure I'm in the classroom for that. Are we going to do anything? No, we'll just sit across the classroom and stare at each other. Okay. But I do want to make it clear that it's not my official inclination to skip that day. I'm just assuming nobody's going to show up, so that's my assumption. Please let me know if you intend to do otherwise. Someday I'm going to say that, and somebody's going to say, you know what, Dr. Barnes, I just want to screw with you, just to take an hour out of your day, actually 2 hours out of your day. I'm just going to sit here and you have to monitor me the entire time, and that student is automatically going to get a failing grade in that class. So yeah. So basically we have 4 weeks left after this week. So for the next few weeks, we're going to be discussing our emerging technologies, and we're going to talk about the scope of that here in just a second. Please remember that your AI deliverable, or not AI deliverable, sorry, wrong class. Your data analysis research deliverable, your next deliverable is due at the end of week 14 before you leave. We will not have a class session at the end of week 14. That's kind of a policy that I've taken in place in the fall semester and also spring semester, like the day before big week-long breaks. I generally don't have class. The reason for that is I used to have classes on that, and about half my class said, Dr. Barnes, I won't be there on Friday. It's like, well, if most of the people aren't going to be here, what's the point of having class? So I know that's eventually going to come bite me, because eventually we're going to start having naturally off on that Friday. It's going to be like Friday plus a week, and then everybody's going to say, Dr. Barnes, I know it's the Wednesday before, but I'm not going to be here. And then we're just going to take the entire semester off, because why not? We have a week-long break. But yeah, we won't have a class that Friday of week 14, but you do have an assignment due on that Friday. Now, if you want to submit it early, that's entirely up to you, but it's not due until the Friday before week 14. Also, there is a quiz that's scheduled for that week. We will not have a class session scheduled for that week. You will be responsible for taking the quiz on your own. Okay. And the reason I did that is pretty straightforward. In the past, I've not scheduled a quiz for weeks that we don't have class sessions, but we are going to cover some content that I do want people to take seriously and engage with. And usually when I don't have quizzes, people kind of tune me out, which really, really annoys me. So I want to make sure that you're held accountable for the content. Yeah, that's a teacher thing. It's not something I'm enjoying doing. I don't particularly like writing quizzes, but I do enjoy being listened to. So, all right. So emerging technologies. Today we're going to be talking about cloud computing. Next week we're going to be talking about cryptocurrency and crypto assets in general. Then we're going to be talking about AI concepts the last 2 weeks. To be honest, the next 3 weeks are going to be the fun ones. I wouldn't have even included this one except for two primary reasons. First of all, there has been a massive amount of growth in the use of cloud computing technologies in the past 2 decades. It's existed for quite a while, but the scope of the work that has been done in there has changed pretty substantially. And we're going to discuss why that's the case here in just a little bit. But another big reason is my assumption is there will be a non-zero number of people in this class who are going to look at possibly taking ISC for the CPA exam. This is a big component of one of the sections of ISC. And so I did think I'd be doing a service if I want to talk about that. By the way, if you're looking at the CPA exam and you're trying to figure out what discipline you're going to take, my personal recommendation is that if your audit track, you're going to be going ISC, and if your tax track, you're going to be doing TCP. It doesn't have to be that way. The pass rates on both sections are pretty strong, regardless. ISC tends to be a lot of memorization. And when I say a lot, I'm talking about 80% of the exam is memorization, which sounds terrible. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't have that kind of memorization task to me. Actually, memorization is the easiest level of knowledge that you have to absorb. So if you decide to study for it and want to actually sit for the CPA exam, ISC, pass rates are really, really high. And it's just because the content is not necessarily subjective. It's very, very objective. So you just have to know what the content says. We're not going to cover everything that's covered in ISC. I strongly do not recommend that you leave this course and say, Dr. Barnes taught me everything, which I didn't. I'm not saying that. Okay. Do I think that you could do reasonably well after this? And the answer is yes, simply because there will be content that you will not know, but it's actually fairly intuitive. I was studying, not this last summer, but the summer beforehand for ISC in the preparation for this course to try to figure out what content I wanted to cover. And I was doing the Becker materials just cold. I wasn't actually going through the content, sitting through the lectures and everything. I just answered the questions, and I was getting 80% pretty easily. Now, I know you're saying, well, Dr. Barnes, that's you because you're a professor and stuff. It's been like 20 years since I studied the CPA content. I'm going to say you probably know more than I do about it. It was mostly just judgment and using good problem solving skills, which I do think that I'm strong at because auditing. But I do think that preparing for the ISC section should not be an onerous task for anybody in this room. I think it's actually pretty doable. Your focus should be far more on the core areas because those are going to be a lot more subjective, a lot more challenging. But for those of you taking seminar, we'll talk about that next semester. All right, so we'll get into that. And for those of you not taking seminar, you can watch the seminar videos as we prepare for this audit section of the CPA exam. Anyway, so cloud computing, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And this is something that came up in the revisions to the Committee on Sponsoring Organizations ERM framework back in 2021. Now, a little bit of historical context. The COSO ERM framework was changed pretty significantly in 2017. And by that, I mean is that they changed the steps in the framework from being just basically a clone or an extension of the internal control integrated framework to being its own framework. So some of you may have been in AIS when I was teaching this, but the COSO cube for the ERM framework was just basically a larger cube than the COSO integrated control or internal control integrated framework. So it was all the same components with a few additional components and an additional objective. That's basically all the ERM framework does, an expansion of internal controls. 2017, they said, this is its own thing, okay? And enterprise resource management is different from internal controls. So we need to characterize it differently. Now, looking at the framework, you may look at the components and say, these are basically the same as the internal control framework. And you're not wrong. They're broad intuitively and objectively speaking because they are trying to cover more boundaries, more ground than the internal control integrated framework, but they effectively cover the same material. And so it's not substantially different, but it does change pretty significantly. Now, the reason this is important is this is supposed to be adapted in a way that incorporation of new topics and new material would be much easier. So in 2021, they started adapting the enterprise resource management framework to incorporate the idea of cloud computing in an organization, which if you think about it, makes a lot of sense because if we actually, we're going to wait for that because that's actually the topic of the last question. So it makes a lot of sense. We'll talk about why that makes a lot of sense when we get to the end of the lecture. So to prepare you for this, I had you read some materials and review some materials. The first of these was the site Geeks for Geeks, which I really, really like this site. The site was fantastic, with the exception of pop-ups, okay? It was maddening. It was like, I was trying to go through this, and it was like anytime I'd scroll down, it was like, new pop-up, okay? And then I'd be reading something, pop up right where I'm reading. Pop-ups are pretty bad in free materials. This was exceptionally bad. This was one of those ones where I was just like, this would drive me insane. This would be my own private version of hell right here. So I had to do research and I had to have pop-ups on it. So that's why I actually created the PDF for you. I know that's getting around it and it's really not supporting the site, which I want to tell you publicly for the people who posted that on Geeks for Geeks, I'm extremely grateful. Scale back the number of pop-ups and I'll go back to the site. I promise you. Okay. Scale it back maybe 30%, okay? 30% minimum, closer to like 50%. Yes.
That website made my computer crash free.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right. So you can kind of see why I had such a problem and why I was saying that I created the PDF because I do think the content is very, very interesting. They did a really nice job of summarizing the key concepts that are covered in the CPA exam. It was a lot. It was a lot. Okay, so the first question I wanted you to identify is what is a cloud deployment model? Now, this is going to be separate because I think the terminology is a little bit confusing. We've got cloud deployment models, and then we've got models of cloud computing, which sound like the same thing, but they're not, okay? So we need to understand what we mean by cloud deployment model as a very general term, and then talk about the different types of deployment models. So I did something interesting. I decided to put everybody in alphabetical order by first name, then I transposed it, okay? So Tyler W., you're up first, okay? All right, so what is a cloud deployment model?
Cloud deployment model fundamentally determines where the infrastructure for the deployment exists and who owns and controls that infrastructure.
That is a fantastic definition, okay? And I think that's going to be very important when we start talking about the models of cloud computing, about who owns the infrastructure and who's responsible for certain operations, which is something that's not covered as well in the Geeks for Geeks, but we're going to talk about that because I think it's an important distinction we have to make. But yeah, very, very good definition. Since that was such a good definition, I'm gonna stick with you. The types of cloud deployment models that were talked about in the article.
Public, private, hybrid, community, and multi-cloud.
Good. Okay. We're going to go into depths on those a little bit more in detail, but we have those 5 cloud deployment models that are going to frame this discussion. The also nice thing about this first resource is it talks about the models of cloud computing, which again are different from cloud deployment models. How this is different? The words are in a different order. Okay. So that's how it's different. All right. Actually, they represent conceptually different items. So let's go ahead and go in depth in there. And this, I think it's important that we go into a lot more depth on this one because this, again, like I said, is going to frame our discussion as we move forward. So, Troy, what is the first of the ones that was listed in this in the resource?
Infrastructure as a service, which helps in delivering computer infrastructure on an external basis for supporting operations.
Yes, so provides services, network equipment, devices, databases, and web servers. Okay. Now, that in itself is a fine definition, but I do think we need to delve a little bit deeper, and because we've got to distinguish what these others represent, with context. So let's go ahead and do a little bit more definition, okay? So I'm going to use some of the Becker definitions that I was using when I was prepping for this for the CPA section. I did not sit for the CPA section, by the way. I don't think that's possible. It's like I passed the CPA exam 20 years ago, but I'd really like to take another section. Is that okay? I think they might say you're a crazy person, yeah, but I actually wouldn't mind sitting for some of the CPA sections just to see if I have the knowledge requisite to be able to teach these sections. It would be really, really sad if I'm just saying, why aren't you getting 75 in these sections? And then I get like a 52. Yeah. But yeah, I'd like to show that. But and to my knowledge, that's not allowed. I think you have to be qualified to sit for the CPA exam. And I'm no longer qualified because I am a CPA. Anyway, so Becker actually used the definition here. It says offers essential computing, storage, and networking services on demand on a pay-as-you-go basis, which that's basically what we just talked about. Was part of Troy's definition that he gave right there. This is the important part. Most applications are managed by the organization. Storage and processing and some security is managed by the cloud service provider. So that is an important distinction to make, is that if we're talking about infrastructure for this as a service, basically it's providing a framework for cloud computing, but it's not really providing anything else. It's very, very good for storage. It's very, very good for networking. It's very good for some computing items. Yes.
Say that.
Sure. So most applications, so the programs, the systems items, those are going to be managed by the organization. So the external client, storage, processing, and some security, not all security, but some security is managed by the cloud service provider. So this is just basically a skeleton, okay, a shell for how we add cloud services. And we would think about this in a context as what would be noted as to what type of organizations would use something like this. And largely speaking, if we're talking about infrastructure as a service, then we're probably talking about a large organization that already has a lot of its infrastructure in place for computing services. It does not need much additional infrastructure. Mostly it just needs additional storage tools and maybe some communications tools, but the minimal amount, okay? So that's kind of the first level of cloud computing, models of cloud computing as infrastructure as a service. So the second one, what is the second one, McKenna? Right, okay. So basically provides a platform for which they can develop their own applications and they can develop their own services and their own facilitate their own systems on a basically that's on an internet system that's provided by the cloud service provider. So moving again into a little bit more definition of a little bit more context, okay? We can already tell a difference right here because when I defined the infrastructure as a service, I was saying it's a shell. It kind of provides some marginal services, but very little in the way of applications or development tools. Now we have platform as service and saying this is entirely for the purposes of development, okay? Development of additional applications and programs. So a complete, this is again Becker's definition, a complete development and deployment environment in the cloud with resources that enable you to deliver everything from simple cloud-based applications to sophisticated cloud-based enterprise applications or cloud-enabled enterprise applications. Now, the important point is coming up here. Proprietary applications are managed by the organization. Everything else is managed by the cloud service provider. So what does that term proprietary mean? What's that? Like so the proprietary applications. If I use the term proprietary, saying something is proprietary to an organization, what does that mean? Yeah, it's basically not just owned, but also developed by them. It's something that's created by them. It's a proprietary service or system or application. Basically means that you created it, you have sole authority to utilize it in whatever tool or way. So the proprietary applications themselves, the ones that were developed and owned by the organization, those are the things that are managed by the organization. Everything else is managed by the cloud service provider. So the system, the applications, the security, all of that's going to be managed by the cloud service provider. So we got a big leap there, pretty big leap. We have, first of all, shell for a really large organization. Now we've got an organization that needs additional tools and resources. And the cloud service provider says, we can give you a platform as a service, which will give you the ability to develop your own proprietary applications and tools. So there's still something that's being managed by the organization, but a large part of it's being managed by the cloud service provider. All right, the last one. Brett, what's the last one?
For the service, it's the delivery of services and applications to the internet. They're often referred to as web-based services.
Web-based software or hosted software. Very good. Okay. So basically all the applications, all the system, all the security is developed and hosted through the system itself, through the software as a service. All right. Again, definition that's provided by Becker. So they say that allows users to connect to and use cloud-based applications over the internet, which are going to be like email and calendar office tools. And the important distinction here is everything except for application usage is managed by the cloud service provider. So basically everything is managed by the cloud service provider. The only thing that's managed by the system or the organization itself is the usage of the tools, okay? Not even the ownership of the tools, just the usage of the tools. Now, this would be more in line with how we see Truman State's cloud system network. We do have a couple of cloud service provider systems that are provided for us. We do Google Drive, and we also do OneDrive through Microsoft, as well as all the other Microsoft suite of tools. And so these are tools that are developed by an external provider. They're provided to us. We have access to them, and we utilize them as individuals who are associated with the organization. We do have IT, but for the most part, IT does not manage the tools themselves. They just manage the usage of those tools. Now, in context, out of the three of these, which do you think is the most commonly used by organizations? Do you think it's IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS? SaaS. Yes, 60% of all cloud usage, cloud model deployment is going to be SaaS, which is a pretty big distinction because you think about it, cloud deployment models didn't really even exist 20 years ago. And now we're saying 60% of all of them are the actual software packages themselves being utilized by organizations. So it's gone from being you have to own this particular piece of software to we can share this piece of software with you now and usage. Massive shift. So yeah, pretty important distinction that we talk about when we talk about the shift for that. So important stuff that we need to know. Moving on to question number 3. According to the second resource, what are the 5 components of the enterprise risk management framework? I think I said risk management. It's supposed to be resource management. That's me being the information security guy or the auditing guys. Then I always think about risk instead of resource management. So I believe that's correct. I could be wrong. If it is risk management, kudos to me. If it's resource management, I guess kudos to me still. Yeah, the RM framework. So what did your group identify, Austin? Yeah, let's see if I can pull this up on here. If this We got the diagram up here. I probably should have been prepped for this already, but yep, there we go. So yeah, governance culture, strategy, objective setting, performance, review and revision, and information communication and reporting. Okay. Oh, it is risk management. Why didn't I say resource management? I'm thinking about resource management. Okay. All right. Ignore what I was talking about. Okay. I'm still okay. All right. Although I would have been right in any situation because I hedged my bets. So that's the way that you teach a class where you get words wrong is you hedge your bets. You say it's going to be either or. I'm going to be correct in either situation. So yeah. So Austin, in your opinion, does this look really familiar? What does it look like to you? Looks like the COSO internal control integrated framework, doesn't it? Yes, almost identical. Okay. So I asked your group, say, how is it similar to the COSO internal control integrated framework? That was pretty obvious. If you just change the words a little bit, it's going to be exactly the same. Governance, culture, control environment. Okay. If we're talking about strategy, objective setting, we could say that that's broadly going to be risk assessment. Performance is going to be control activities, review and revision. That's monitoring. Information communication reporting. That's information communication. So the distinction, the important point to get home here is not how are these similar, because we could actually identify parallels pretty easily. Why did they think they needed to change this to wording that was effectively the same, but noticeably different in certain parts? And the answer has to do with what is it that we're trying to accomplish here? Because we're talking about ERM management, that's more broad than just the concept of internal controls. Don't get me wrong, internal controls are great, but internal controls are not everything an organization does. Can you imagine that would be really, really strange if it's like, okay, we're going to forego sales to the customers. We really need to manage those controls more effectively. It says, well, why do we need to manage the controls if we don't have a business? As if that's how important controls are. It's not really true, okay? Controls are a subset of overall business operations strategy. So when we talked about ERM, when I was talking about it earlier, the old version of the ERM was just basically a broader expansion of the internal control integrated framework. This is still true, but this is just going to be a little bit more constrained and confined, okay? I do think that some of these could be very easy parallels to the internal control integrated framework. If we're talking about control environment, if you reframe that as governance and culture, I'd say those sound the same to me. Those sounds basically the same. I can't see any big distinction and difference there. Now, if we talked about enterprise risk assessment and strategy and objective setting, those have much different applications, okay? Because enterprise risk assessment, okay, or the entities risk assessment, not enterprise, entities risk assessment, that is a very specific focus, is identifying risks so they can respond appropriately. Strategy is much more involved. It's going to be much more broad to the organization's objectives and business processes, and the objective setting is going to be a natural response to that. So even though those steps are somewhat synonymous, I would say strategy encompasses a lot more work and a lot more detail on part. Same thing for performance. Control activities is going to be performance specifically of internal controls, whereas performance of the organization is going to be more broad when we talk about management and risk resources. So I think the ultimate answer, if we're talking about why this is different, is the answer is that enterprise risk management is necessarily going to be a much more broad concept than just internal controls. We tend to characterize controls through the lens of risk. Does everybody remember when we talked about this? I had my control sequence up on the board, and I was really, really proud of it because I created it myself in Paint. And I said, how do we characterize risk from an audit perspective? And we said, management assertion, Dr. Barnes. I said, by the way, you're not going to get away from that, okay? Those of you who are in seminar auditing, you're going to be directly affected by that. Those of you who are not seminar auditing, you're still going to be directly affected by that, okay? But we do understand that risk is a necessary component of business operations, but it's not the only component. And this is something we talked about very early in the course. What was the whole goal of governance? Was it to manage risk? No, it's to maximize business value, okay? And that's going to be, I think, the more of the broad encompassing. I think enterprise risk management kind of falls in the middle. It's not just solely focused on value, but it's maximizing value subject to risk, which we did say that was an important constraint with respect to governance when we talked about it earlier on in this course. All right, moving on to question number 4. Question number 4 says, provide a brief definition of the cloud deployment models that you identified in question 1. So what were there? There were 5 cloud deployment models, and I have 5 groups. This is just perfect, okay? I had 7 groups last semester. It was really, really awkward, okay? But yeah, we got 5 cloud deployment models and 5 groups. So let's go ahead and talk about each of them in turn. Okay, so Tyler W., can you give me a good definition of what your group found for public cloud?
model where the infrastructure is owned by the cloud service provider and anyone can use the service, whether free or low.
Yeah, so owned by the cloud service provider, basically anybody can use it. I think if we use talk about Google Drive or Dropbox, those would be kind of our traditional views of the public cloud. There are some free mechanisms. If you do very, very limited storage, you can use those for free. You have to sign up for them, but you can use them for free. But if you exceed a certain capacity, then you actually have to pay for the service. So yeah, good identification there. How is that distinct from a private cloud, Troy?
I think that's the opposite of a public cloud. It's a one-on-one environment for a single user, and it refers to the ability to access systems and services within a given order or organization.
Yeah. So they do actually say that in the article. They say that's the opposite, and I think that from the terminology, that conceptually it is kind of the opposite. It's not just everybody can access it; that only specific users can access it. Which, from that perspective, it is opposite. But I don't think, broadly speaking, that it's going to be opposite, particularly in this day and age, because we're talking about applications and services. Public clouds can offer those applications and services to a broader audience nowadays, particularly with software as a service being offered. So I think opposite of is a bit of a misnomer, unless you're just specifically talking about the audience. From the audience perspective, yes, it is going to be opposite, but it's a little bit different from the actual services and systems that are offered that are available to the user. But yeah, conceptually speaking, I think we can agree that private and public are not the same thing. All right. What is the next one's hybrid cloud, McKenna? Yeah, so there are private elements and there are public elements, and it kind of mixes the two up and has cloud deployment models that are available for both. Okay, this sounds really familiar, by the way, because we talked about something else back in AIS, and some of you may remember, some of you may not remember. If you do remember, kudos to you. But back in AIS in undergraduate, we talked about something very conceptually similar to this. What was something that had private, public, and hybrid elements that we talked about back in AIS? It wasn't clouds, by the way, but it was a concept similar to clouds. It was blockchain. Yeah, blockchain had a similar deployment structure. Okay, and yeah, they had systems on that. There was also the consortium blockchain, which we're not going to get into, but yeah, very conceptually similar to that. Then we have what we got up. Community cloud. Community cloud. Brett, what's community cloud?
Where systems and services are accessible by a group of organizations that use the cloud in the same way, but integrate the needs of similar companies.
Yeah, so it's basically a cloud developed for a specific group of entities, not users. And we talked about the consortium blockchain just a second ago. That sure sounds a lot like the consortium blockchain. So very similar to that in that context. So similar conceptually, but different approach. Then we have this new one, and Austin, I keep giving you the hard questions. I hope you're prepared for them. So it was not intentional, by the way. I didn't get up in my office and say, you know what, I really want to make sure that Austin really knows her stuff today. So what's a multi-cloud?
And this development groups available.
Yeah, a mixture of cloud service offerings, even cloud deployments, development models. So can use different cloud environments, particularly if there are public cloud environments that can be utilized. I would argue that we probably have something like that here at Truman State with a public or a multi-cloud, simply because we do have different systems that are available. So cloud systems that we could identify, as I mentioned Google Drive, I mentioned Microsoft. We also have it's Brightspace, but I desire to learn cloud. And then I think our network is also developed on a cloud deployment tool, although I'm not sure it may be proprietary to Truman State. But some examples of that, that's becoming more and more common as organizations integrate systems that have different objectives and different systems that they need to utilize within their operations. So yeah, we've talked about multi-cloud. Multi-cloud is becoming more and more commonplace, and especially as we become more and more comfortable with the integration of cloud systems in our operations. All right, so question number 5. Move down to question number 5. Okay, here's where things are going to get a little bit hairy. So under the section overall analysis of cloud deploy models, the first resource provides a table for analysis of 4 models. Briefly characterize each of these models using the factor in this table. How would you rate each of these factors for the model that's not included in the table multi-cloud? So once again, we have 5 cloud deployment models, okay? And I'm not gonna make Austin do multi-cloud this time. I'm gonna mix it up a little bit because that's just merely unfair. So let's see, how are we gonna do this? I'm just gonna bounce it around a little bit. Austin, I'm gonna start you off with the easy one. So we're talking about public cloud. So we have what looks like 5 factors here. Now, how would you characterize public cloud according to the factors? Obviously, it's on the table right here. But which of these do you think is most distinct about the public cloud in this particular context? Yep. So I think out of the factors that we identify, the fact that that's a public cloud is easy to start up and it's very cost effective because it's going to be something that's available to everybody. So security protocols are going to be existent, though limited. Okay. So important to note. All right. Troy, what about private cloud? Actually, I did you second last time. I'm gonna hold on. I went to third. Let's say Brett. Okay, you do private cloud.
Private cloud is complex to set up and require professional expertise, but offers high scalability from data security and privacy. So
Okay.
it's costly and they're like maintain.
And there is some arguments to say that that public cloud and private cloud are exact opposites, because if you look at these, most of these are opposite from one another. Okay. Now, reliability and scalability and flexibility are the same. So there is not true opposites. But basically, we can say a private system can be set up as a public system can be set up as a private system. It just costs a little bit more. And it's a little bit more complicated to do that. Okay. All right, Troy, it's your time to shine now. So, community cloud, how would you characterize community cloud in this context?
We said it can be as cheap as a public cloud, but also as expensive as a private cloud. It's difficult to set up. It has high scaling and reliability with data security and privacy.
Yep. So the cost is one of those things to note. It's probably more expensive than a public cloud, but because you have multiple members who can defer the cost or defray the cost, then you can actually um, you can set it up as something that would be a little bit more complex and a little more diverse, but not necessarily be as expensive for all the operations and the organizations. Then we have the hybrid cloud. Let's see, McKenna, why don't you do the hybrid cloud? Tyler, I'm saving the best for last. All right. McKenna, not you the best in the class. I'm saying the best. Okay, you're the best in the class. My apologies. Okay, yeah. All right. So McKenna, what do we do on the hybrid cloud?
But the cost will vary depending on how many public.
So it takes all the strengths of the public and private clouds and kind of incorporates them together and says this week in this area, it's going to be strong in the hybrid cloud. So it's basically the best of both worlds, right? Did you put best of both worlds in your answer? Greatest balance. Okay. So you were thinking best of both worlds. All right. You weren't thinking Hannah Montana when you're thinking best of both worlds. No, okay. That's actually a joke from last semester that I rolled over to this semester. So yeah, you can thank Dylan DeLeon for that joke. All right, anyway, best of both worlds, best of all possible worlds in the hybrid cloud. It takes the strengths of the private cloud and the public cloud and in there. Is anybody friends with Dylan? You gonna send it says Dr. Barnes is talking about advanced AIS again. He mentioned Hannah Montana. Let's see if he remembers the joke. Anyway, yeah, so we talked about that. So then the only one that's not listed up here, and I think for apparent reasons, but we'll talk about that, is going to be multi-cloud. All right, Tyler, this is where the one we're saving for you. This is the moment. This is where Lose Yourself is playing in the background by Eminem. Okay, this is your time to shine. Okay, so how did your group characterize multi-cloud according to this framework? Yeah, that'd be great.
Complicated, a lot of things are interrelated. Flexibility is pretty high though. Cost can be a lot just because of that initial setup. High reliability, kind of low data security and low data privacy.
Yeah. So largely, that's kind of what I agree with as well. I think that the scalability and flexibility has some challenges, mostly because you have to integrate multiple systems into them. But it can be flexible in the regard that it can adapt to multiple systems. So it really depends on you to do that. Now, I want to throw out here, if I likely ask this question to all 17 people in the room or all 18 people in the room, including myself, I probably have 18 different combinations of answers. This is not something that we're going to hold as fact. This is just mostly interpretation. In fact, I'd say that most of the questions moving forward here are interpretation, and there's not going to be any one right answer. So you're saying, well, that's great. That means Dr. Barnes is not going to ask it on the quiz. No, if I say something is something, then you better write that down and make sure you know it. Okay. So just because because I'm wrong about something like saying resource instead of risk doesn't mean I won't hold you accountable for it on the quiz on Friday. All right, moving on. Question number 6 says, consider the models of cloud computing we identified in question 2. So IaaS, or PaaS, and SaaS. Which cloud deployment models would be most appropriate for each of these models of cloud computing? Now, again, this is heavily subjective. Again, 18 different people. I imagine we'd have 18 different combinations of answers. I'm looking for strong justification of this. And then we're going to talk about identifying a type of business that would be likely to utilize a type of model of cloud computing. All right. So I gave Tyler a really challenging question and he shined. Okay. So I'm going to let Tyler go for this one. Okay. We're going to start with Troy. So for IaaS, what would be the types of cloud deployment models you identified in that one?
We said private cloud would be the best option due to its high security and privacy, and since it builds the company's IT infrastructure.
Mhm.
And then as an example, we said a large business would utilize this models that say have they spend more resources.
Yep, that's pretty much verbatim what my answer was as well, which makes me wonder, were you looking at my notes? Did you hack into the cloud and identify my notes? I said, if you did, good job. I mean, yeah, my cybersecurity protocols are apparently really lax. No, I said private, and I also said large organizations. I do think that there's some argument that you could also incorporate hybrid cloud and multi-cloud into this as well. But private would be the most obvious and apparent one, the one that I think they go to. All right, McKenna, what about platform as a service?
These are the best way for developers to build applications and services of the internet and public cloud.
Okay, what type of organization do you think?
Microsoft is.
Okay, so that would be a program that would use organizations. So a development organization, probably medium sized. Some organization does not have already a lot of existing proprietary tools, but wants to develop them. So needs the infrastructure. They're not very large. They don't have their existing platforms and systems, but they do want to develop those for the future. So kind of a scaling organization. And I would agree with public cloud. I think to some degree you can argue everything but multi-cloud. I think multi-cloud would be a poor fit for platform as a service, just simply because if we're talking about multi-cloud, we're talking about a very robust organization. That being said, I'm arguing multi-cloud for Truman State. Now I'm arguing that they can't do platform as a service, which is a little bit of a contradiction, but I do think that there's some challenges in adopting a true multi-cloud that integrates with itself. So that may be a little bit of a contradiction and from something I've talked about before, but that's my argument. That's going to stick through it. So then we have software as a service. Brett, what did your group identify?
Private cloud because the model delivers services and applications through the internet, organizations, instead of any business they use stuff like OneDrive or.
Would that be a really large established organization or a small organization with little infrastructure? Would it be a large organization with a lot of existing programs, a lot of existing security, or a small organization with little existing infrastructure? Yes, very good, very good. It was one of those two, yeah. But yeah, we're definitely talking about smaller organizations for software as a service because we're talking about organizations that need these systems to be able to operate. Okay, if we're talking about a large organization, they probably already have everything that they've set up before. So smaller organizations with little existing IT infrastructure, I'd agree. Private cloud. I also threw in public cloud as a possibility here, and then I've got hybrid, but I've also got in parentheses maybe. Okay. I think that the options are very limited when we're talking about software as a service, simply because it is for general use. It is for general application of use. So the more variety, there's going to be less variety available, the more options available. Yes. It could be a community cloud. The idea behind a community cloud is that a lot of organizations are going to share particular protocols and systems. And if we're talking about software as a service, all of those protocols have already been developed by the cloud service provider. So if you think about something like Microsoft OneDrive, if Truman decided to work with the other universities in Missouri so that they could actually access Microsoft OneDrive would charge every single university individually. They wouldn't say, all right, here's a one-time charge, universities can split it amongst yourselves. So that was my logic in saying community. Now, again, that's my interpretation of it. I am willing to accept my interpretation as flawed. Okay, so if that's the case. Now, could you make an argument that community could be used for other protocols? Like if we're talking about something that's a smaller, less established software as a service, maybe something that's trying to evolve into a certain workspace, like Alteryx would be a good example as an educator's tool. Now, that's a bad example because we don't actually pay anything for Alteryx. They provide education. The whole idea being is that they want you to get you access, or they want to get you access to the system and be experienced with the tool so that when you go off to work and somebody says, we need to do some data analytics. Anybody got any experience in how to use Alteryx? You can be like, okay. They're trying to facilitate the use of it in the future by making sure that people are using it now. But again, if we were talking about like trying to actually set up licenses for a university, a smaller organization may say, well, we could set it up for the entire university system and you could share it amongst them. So maybe do something like 500 active license between all universities and everybody gets a share of that. So thinking about it, I think we could make an argument for community cloud, but there would have to be very specific rules set up in place for that to happen. All right. Last question for the day. Refer to the third resource. In your opinion, why is specific guidance necessary with ERM for cloud computing? I'm not going to throw this one, Jay, Austin, okay? Because I had this one set up from the beginning, okay? But do you feel comfortable answering the first question? All right, go for it. All right.
Therefore, having the governance programs.
Right. So if we're talking about guidance in this area, it was just basically the kind of the newness factor. The idea that cloud computing may not be something that's relevant to organizations, particularly those that are growing and are expanding. Now, I know that we're talking about a 20-year period, and most everybody's saying, Dr. Barnes, that's my lifetime. But 20 years is not a lot of time to adapt to change of this magnitude. 20 years ago, cloud computing did not exist. So the COSO ERM framework was much different in context. And so to be able to integrate these particular concepts is really, really important because it does change fundamentally the business environment which many organizations have been operating in. We didn't have to worry about cloud tools and the usage of cloud programs and the usage of cloud software and applications and infrastructure. If we go back just even a few years, even if we think about a decade ago, the idea of software as a service is something that was kind of minimally used. Did OneDrive exist in some capacity? Yes, you could access those tools, but it was not commonplace. Most organizations said we have to actually buy the programs and the licenses for those programs in order to be able to use them. So this is a profound change. And so we need to be able to understand if companies and organizations are subscribing to this particular form, to these particular forms, using software as a service or even something simple as platform as a service, what are the risks that they're going to be exposed to as an organization? And what are the things that they need to be able to address? Because it's much, much different than it was just even 10 years ago. So which components of the ERM framework are most likely most relevant to cloud computing? What is our answer for any subjective question in any accounting class? And it depends, okay? And it really depends on how much the cloud computing resources affect your organization. If we're talking about to a small degree, then we're probably talking about something that's very, very small in scope, okay? I'm trying to get back to that, okay? Yeah. Talking about the smallest degree, we're probably talking about review and revision and information communication reporting, because we're only talking about minor aspects of the cloud affecting the organization. If we're talking about an organization that's entire operations are built around the cloud, it could affect all 5 components to a very, very great degree. So it really depends on the depth of the services. Now, I would say for infrastructure as a service, it probably is a minor effect. We probably have to adopt this, but there's not going to be a lot of applications and resources used in this regard. Talking about software as a service, all 5 components are probably going to be applied in this regard. Now, did I ask you to go into that depth on your answer? No, I was just basically asking a very, very basic answer. But if somebody in this group, if one of the class, if one of the groups in here said it depends, I'm going to be very, very happy, okay? Because that's ultimately what the answer would be. By the way, that's only for this question. Please do not get in the habit of on future questions, starting each question say, it depends, ... okay? That would be technically a correct answer, but I'd like a little bit more depth in the responses. So that's where we're going here. All right, done for today. We got Ultrix 3 on Friday. Ultrix 2 is due on Friday as well as a quiz. See you all then.